positions,
Wow.
which is nonetheless not too shabby. And again, Bird came from a very wealthy family and enjoyed a illustrious career as a composer. And then the other composer, just mentioned briefly, who also had a tremendous output of church music and Catholic music later on in his life, was Thomas Tallis, whose output is tremendous and wrote a lot of great music as well.
Do they know each other? Do
They
some
did.
of these?
They did. And it's interesting, as you look back to that time, and of course, you know, depending on which country they were from, I mean, you know, they couldn't hop on a plane and go from France to Germany or to England or to Italy or whatever. Just as a side note of that, it's interesting that you mentioned that. You know, you look at Johann Sebastian Bach. His dates are 1685 to 1750. Handel, G.F. Handel, George Frederick Handel, who wrote Messiah and so many other great choral music. His dates were 1685 to 1759. The two never met. The two never met. Bach never met Handel. And so, you know, Bach stayed in his Germany, and Handel stayed in his, you know, he was much more mobile in terms of traveling around because he came from royalty and came from very wealthy as well. But I just find that so interesting. Two contemporaries,
Giants.
yeah, giants in music, never met. Isn't that amazing? I mean, it's just amazing. So, yeah, it's just utterly amazing. So, talking about 20th century composers. So I thought I'd take a look at one composer today who's one of my favorites for a number of reasons, and that's a French composer, Maurice Durfray, whose dates were 1902 to not just very long ago, seems like 1986. Durfray was a French composer, teacher. He was a brilliant organist, devout Catholic, and talk about writing music for the church in the 20th century genre. That would be Durfray. Tremendous output. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. He wrote a collection of 4 motets, based obviously on Gregorian chant themes. These were composed in 1960. And the collection of 4 would be Caritas, Where Charity and Love Prevail. Gorgeous, gorgeous motet. Used frequently, like during the Mandatum, during the washing of the feet. It's a fabulous piece. Tantum Ergo, for Eucharistic celebrations. Tantum Ergo, and you know, hence the great sacrament. Tu es Petrus, thou art rock. And finally, the fourth one, Toto Pulchra est, which means you are all beautiful. You are completely beautiful, referring to the Blessed Mother. He wrote a Requiem Mass, which is probably one of his most famous works, the Durfray Requiem. We're going to talk about this for a minute. He was fascinated with chant. Durfray was. He attended the Conservatoire de Paris, and so much of his output of choral music was based on chant. His Requiem Mass takes the text from the Requiem, beginning with the Introit, Mass for the Dead, and every movement of the Requiem Mass is based on one of those Gregorian melodies, but the Introit, the Kyrie, Sanctus, the Imperatissum. So what I said earlier about, you know, composers kind of giving honor or tip of the hat back to composers of earlier generations, there you go with chant. This was just something that he was very, very much in tune to, and so much of his output was based on that. He also wrote Missa cum Jubilo, Mass of Joy, based on several plain chant settings celebrating the feast days of the Blessed Virgin Mary. That's for men's chorus, actually, and organ and orchestra. So a little bit about his life. He was the assistant at the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris, where another famous organist, Louis Vierne, was the organist. And he was actually at Vierne's side when Vierne was playing Mass, and passed away at the council, passed away at the organ. This is a true story. And Louis Vierne is another composer of a vast amount of organ literature, his famous organ symphonies. He was the organist at Notre Dame for years. He was Vierne's assistant and was at his side turning pages during Mass when Vierne passed away. Isn't that amazing? So if I pass away at the organ, that's going to be a good thing. I wouldn't want to be anyplace else.
When did the organ find its prominence?
Oh, we're going to talk about that today too. We got a lot of good stuff to talk about, okay? So, so then he was, after he left Notre Dame, he was appointed titular organist at the Church of Saint-Étienne de Mont in Paris, one of the most gorgeous churches in Paris. There are many of them. And that's where he lived out his life until 1986. He was married to Madame Durflay, his wife, who he had met when he was at the Paris Conservatoire. She was also a devout Catholic, brilliant organist in her own right. They were involved a number of years ago, I think back in the early 70s, in a pretty horrific automobile wreck right outside of Paris. He sustained much more serious injuries and passed away in 1986. His wife actually died in 1999, and both of them toured in many churches and cathedrals here in the States. And if I'm not, I may be speaking out of not knowing, I believe that one or both of them performed here at the cathedral a number of years ago, and I think they did actually. Check with Gregory Glenn on that one, but so both of them were very prominent musicians and himself composers of the 20th century. So, and that's just one of the composers, of great music. So, any questions up to this point? Yes?
So does this still continue? Because that's probably the most current of our time. Are there current composers that we will talk about in the future, or did this end?
There are. They're much less than there were, of years ago. I mean, when you look at liturgical music today, Catholic, and not just even Catholic music, just music written for the church or for public worship. In the Roman Church, if you look at, for example, in the Anglican Church, one of the famous composers of the Anglican Church is Herbert Howells. I mean, we do a fair amount of his work here at the cathedral as well. He wrote a vast repertoire of music for the Anglican liturgy, and he died. Herbert Howells died in 1983. But they wrote music for the church. We're seeing far fewer composers, now that are who's writing masses anymore. Leonard Bernstein wrote, a mass. But Chichester Psalms are fabulous compositions. But there are far fewer composers that are writing music for the church. And why do you think that is? It's interesting,
Well, church attendance is down also.
Church attendance is down. That's true. Yep. And I know, for example, in my field of being an organ major or say a choral, conducting choral major, universities are struggling to attract students because things, times have changed, things have changed, and organ studios that once were full are not full anymore. At Notre Dame about 5 years ago, they finally established a Master's of Sacred Music through the Medieval Institute, which is great, that my organ professor, Craig Kramer, was very responsible in establishing. And then 3 years ago, they finally established a DMA, Doctoral of Musical Arts program in sacred music. And they've done pretty well in attracting students, but it's still a struggle. Craig says it's a struggle to attract students, because you look at the art and you look at working in a full-time church position. It's a lot of hours, and a lot of times, the pay is not what young people these days are, they want to get out of school and start making $100,000 a year doing something. Well, that doesn't happen for church musicians. But when you look at the fulfillment of what, there's something else I would rather be doing, But, so the number of composition majors in universities has declined as well. So that's interesting. Yeah, anyone else have a question?
I think times are changing, the trend, if any of them are into anything, it's the modern Christian music, if you want to put church to it.
Right. And that, we're not gonna talk about the, validity of what's appropriate or what's appropriate, but I mean, stylistically, but I think, and what's interesting, where I am in South Carolina, it's still very, very, very traditional. The South, or coming from the Northeast, or the South is still very, very traditional. A lot of women still come to Mass with the...
But also, South is growth.
It is growth, yeah, and it's growing. I mean, the Catholic Church is growing, but when you look at, tradition-wise, it's still, parts of the South are still pretty, pretty conservative, so, yeah.
It's okay with
Father
me.
Silva, yes, what were you going to say?
I just want to say one thing for the kids. Mass parts are always named in Latin. Okay, so when you are preparing a liturgy and you are going to prepare the music for the liturgy, you don't say Lamb of God, or you don't say Holy, Holy. You say Sanctus, Agnus Dei, Kyrie, Gloria, Introito. You have to use the Latin terms to designate mass parts. Okay, that's the way it's done. Just like church documents that are always designated in Latin. Okay, and that's the way you do it in the liturgy. You don't, because Utah, well, Utah, it's a middle church town. So anyway, so you always use the Latin terms. Okay, so when you're preparing a liturgy and maybe you're talking to the bishop and say, well, we're going to have the Agnus Dei said or recited. Okay, you don't say the Lamb of God. Okay, it's always the Latin terms to designate mass parts. Okay, and mass parts never vary. The text is given to us in the Roman Missal, and you don't change it. Okay, the Lamb of God is always be the Lamb of God, and the Sanctus is going to be always the Sanctus. Okay, you never vary it. Okay, and you have to be especially careful with that, because you will find pieces that will say the word Gloria, or we'll use the Holy Holy like the Trisagio, but it's not a Sanctus. Okay, so you have to be very careful not to accept those pieces instead of. Mass parts are always mass parts, and they always have the same text. They can vary in the music, but not, the text has to be exactly the same as the Roman Missal. Now, if you run into trouble, because you will find choirs here and there and everywhere in Utah that they want to use an older version of the text. You can't take it. It has to reflect the Roman Missal.
Yes.
It has to be what it is now, not what it used to be in the 80s when this lady was in the children's choir. Okay, because I run into that a lot. Okay, oh, but this is from another time. Yes, well, God bless those times, but you need to use what's in the Roman Missal. Okay, sorry for interrupting you.
No, and that's what the beauty and the tradition of our Catholic faith has been, that this is still what we, and when just as an aside, back to your question about composers, when the new Roman Missal came out, it was like overnight composers started writing the masses. Like, well, the text changed, so we had, I would say probably within the first year or two of the Roman Missal actually coming out and being introduced, there were so many composers that were writing masses. And quite honestly, and I don't mean this in a personal sense, but I mean they were not well written. textually or musically, they were
No,
not well written.
have lots of mistakes.
Yeah, and so you have to be very careful, and Father Silva is so correct, you have to be very careful to safeguard the text as it is with its, its origin, and that's really, that's important. Good. Well, wonderful, great questions. These are all really, really thought-provoking questions, okay? So now that we've spent a little bit of time kind of looking through the history of music and some of the composers, I want to specifically talk about some music, even more specific to our Catholic tradition. So the second kind of portion of this morning's presentation, so much of the information that I'm going to be using comes from Sing to the Lord, which was a document, Sing to the Lord, Music and Divine Worship, which was actually published in 2007 by the USCCB, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. And the basic premise,
Sorry, if you're launching into the second part, could we take a break?
if you want to break now, is a good time to break? Yeah, that's right, we need a break, don't we? Sorry.
Yes, we do.
All right, so let's stop there. We'll take a break, and are we doing fittings for the Dalmatics?
Yeah, we will be calling some. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
All right, perfect. Yeah, let's take 15, 20 minutes, and if you have to take